sometimes my best conversions are the older expires.
Get those 17 phone calls in between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m.
And what I mean by that is the time has gotten compressed. In other words, it was just like mail that expired like constantly. So the topic of today, everybody, is expired listings. I think we all agree here that expired listings is probably our foundation of how we get our seller business. Would you guys agree?
That's definitely how I build my business. Yes.
All right, cool. So the first thing I was thinking about with expireds, honestly, was, what is so attractive to us when it comes to expireds? Like Rich, I guess we'll start with you because obviously, I have a different definition of it. For me, it's always been it's predictable. There's always going to be someone coming up there and showing up every single day. It's a predictable source of revenue that you can count on, assuming you know what you're doing and how to talk.
No, I agree. So expired listings is how we both built our business, right? And so what's so attractive about them is that we know that they signed a listing agreement with some realtor that was out there, right? And for whatever reason, that realtor was not able to perform to sell their house, right? So I like to think about it as the low-hanging fruit, right? So low-hanging fruit meaning, listen, they signed a contract, they're potentially ready, willing, and able to potentially work with another agent. So, why not come to us with our proven track records, our techniques to be able to sell the property? Do you agree?
Yeah. Emily, what about you?
Yeah, I think there's a limiting belief that expireds aren't motivated from what I've found, but you have to look at their actions, right? I mean, they interviewed agents, they signed a listing agreement that came to market. And I think a lot of times they just aligned with the wrong agent in most cases. A lot of the expireds that I've taken personally, they took, the advice of a friend, they went with the neighbor, they went with the family member, and they were just misguided. And so they're just looking for somebody that can point them in the right direction and get the home sold. So I think, that's kind of been my hyper focus recently, is just every single morning calling the new expireds.
And then Emily, can you actually talk about that? Because you had probably one of the biggest breakouts that I've seen personally. I've never seen someone have a breakout of just expired focused listing seller business in a matter of I think it was 3 months or so. You were just calling like crazy, and it just so happened that the market turned, so you were able to you had a doubling of, let's say, of the numbers that you can call. So can you talk about that a little bit about what was in your mindset then as you were calling to get that seller business and to have the success that you had? I think you were listing close to 10 a month at least for the first and second quarters. And so if you can talk about that, that'll be, I think, super helpful.
Yeah, for me, I was pretty buyer heavy, right? Because I'm on a team, and so we do a ton of buyer business, and I was getting burnt out. It was during COVID, and so I was just running around constantly nonstop. And I was like, if I really want to take control of my business, I'm either going to call expireds or I'm going to call for sale by owners. So I flipped a coin. I was like, I'm going to start with expireds. And so I didn't really start hyper focused on expireds until I guess it was end of last year. Things started slowing down a little bit. So I just was consistent with my actions, right? And I think that's what it all comes down to, is if you're consistent with it, you're showing up, doing it every single day, you can't lose. And so I just kept showing up, I kept calling, and eventually I started landing appointments, and then you build that confidence. The more appointments you go on, the more listings you take. It's just like a spiral effect. So I think it's
actually, can you talk about that? You're how do you stay consistent? That's a question in the Phone Warrriors that comes up. It seems like with a lot of agents, they either are newer in the business. How do you stay consistent? Rich, you can answer that next, because obviously there's a lot of different thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's us joining forces and starting our Phone Warrriors, right? So I wanted to show up for you guys. I wanted to show up for the other agents in the group. So that is what really kind of spearheaded everything. Was I'm going to show up. I've got to be present. We're leaders of this group. So showing up every day consistently. And when you start doing something day in and day out, it gets ingrained in you. And so you're like, okay, this is just part of my routine. It feels natural. And then things just start happening. So I think that's the hardest thing for people, is just to get into that routine and start that consistency piece. So. And
do you suggest that there's any better times to call? Because I know a lot of agents, they're scared to call at 7:45. They're scared to call at 8 a.m. They might even be scared to call at 9 a.m. right? But do you see
I know.
any difference in the time that you call, whether it be morning, afternoon, or night?
I think you have to try all of it, right? I think you can't just call once and hope that it works. And I think that's what a lot of agents do is they call at 7:45 or 8 in the morning. They don't get the response. They don't get the pickups. And so they're like, you know what, this isn't working for me. I'm just going to try something different. I'm going to call FSBOs or I'm going to whatever. So I call in the morning, I call in the afternoon, I call in the evening. There's no really pattern to it. It's just constantly just picking up and calling multiple times. I think it's 17 times you have to reach out to someone before you actually get an appointment in some cases. So sure, you're going to get, people that answer on the first call, but it's the last man standing. So if you're
Emily, didn't you set a record? Sorry, didn't you set a record for like calling someone? I think you posted something in the group. Like it was like, what was it? It was like 16 times from the same number, and finally they picked up, and it was like you got the listing, and that was it, right?
100%. You just got to wear them out, right? And so I think that's key. And so most people are going to give up after 3 or 4 calls. Sometimes my best conversions are the older expired, the ones that people aren't calling anymore. They've given up. And so I go after those. So I'm like, okay, they've already been worn out 3 weeks ago. They're probably not getting as many calls. I'm going to tackle them now, and I'm just going to keep calling. So I wish there was a set formula that we could, give people, but it's just a matter of consistency and just continuing to call and call and call and call. So
yeah, I mean,
what
for
about
me,
you?
yeah, I was gonna say, for me, this is, I think, like the whole thing about like people do give up. Like I've seen, like you call 1 time or 2 times, and it's like, well, they didn't answer. I guess it's not a good lead. I guess, and they start making all these like weird stories in their head about like what this lead is and what this is not. And like at the end of the day, but you have to also realize in the times that we are in 2023, calling expireds, I think, is a lot different than when it was in 1985 versus 2005. And what I mean by that is the time has gotten compressed. In other words, there's so many distractions for these expireds to go different directions at an instantaneously. As an example, I called the guy this morning. He's telling me he found someone on Google yesterday and they already have signed paperwork as of that night. And it's like, that is crazy that you found someone on Google that quickly. So how do you get around that? At least for me, it's just running it like an emergency room. It is like 100% go. And you just, another patient, but you keep calling, like you said, and that, because unless you can control the narrative of compressing that time down, I think for expireds, guys, I don't know, you're going to have a very hard time with that particular lead source. But what do you think, Rich?
I think that to Emily's point is staying consistent, and she said one crucial thing is a couple weeks old lead is going to have less activity than a fresh expired, right? Day 1 expired, day 2, day 3, they're probably still getting bombarded, but you go back 7 days, you go back 14, 21, and if you want to go back 1, 2, 3 months, you're probably going to get a higher pickup rate in the latter part. I think that if we're going to beat down the expireds, is do it in the morning. Get those 17 phone calls in between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. because just like how you said, this morning I was calling and I started at 8 o'clock on the dot. I went to that list, I think 6 times, but by 9 o'clock, I just kept recalling the list. And finally the lady picked up and was like, you keep calling me, why? And we had a conversation. I was like, well, finally you're gonna pick up. So why not take the adage of continuously pound that same source for as long as you can in the shortest amount of time before even agents are going to be waking up, because some agents not even up by 9, right? So why not get the early bird gets the worm, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you this: do you guys ever do any mail, like direct mail to expireds, or do you guys mainly just?
I tried. Yeah, I don't know about you, Rich. I tried doing that. I had a 10 days of pain campaign. This was like a few years back, before COVID, and it was just like mail the expired like constantly, just like one day. It was once a day for 10 days, and we think we did it for maybe 6 months. Everything we try and test is always 6 months minimum, so it's like 6 months of that, and the phone call is just where it's at. I don't know. It just direct mail. I think I got 1 call back, but it was the tenant of the property. It wasn't even the actual person, because it was like the wrong person living there. So,
Yeah.
You could be that passive. I think it's okay. But for this kind of source, like they want results like now, if they are serious about doing something, right?
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. I've tested mailing. I'm starting to do it just to see. I'm calling them, of course, but I'm like, what, for the ones that aren't answering, I still want to reach them. So I'm sending like letters. I'm doing it two ways. I'm doing like a casual letter, like handwritten letter. Hey, is your home still on the market? If so, can you give me a call?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm doing like a case study right now. I'm trying that. And then I'm also sending actual more formal letter in a bright green envelope, handwriting it out, and then sending it to them that way. So I'm just going to try to touch them multiple times, because what I'm finding in my market, I don't know if this is true or not, but when I talk to people and the expired that I have taken, I've asked them, I'm like, can you share with me how many calls you got? And in my market, they're like, I could probably count. I've got 30 in a day. I don't know why I answered your call. I thought it was the doctor's office, whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'm obviously going to keep calling because I know that works for me, but I'm also going to try to email them. I'm going to try to maybe drop off a packet in the mail, and then I'm going to also physically mail something just to see. So I'll share how that starts working, but I don't know.
That's cool. And maybe every market's different. Maybe down in Raleigh, North Carolina, Cary, the whole area where you
exactly.
Maybe mailers is it's like a nice supplement to get maybe a few calls a week just from that. Rich, what do you think about the mailer side?
Listen, I've done mailers, right? I've done, similar, to your, 10 days of pain. And for me, it's, I rather use sweat equity over check equity, right? And that just me personally, I'd rather just pound the phones and figure a way out how to get in front of them, or if that means just go knocking on their door. Somehow, some way, we're going to get in front of the contact. So that's just me. I built my business strictly on the phones, and I don't see a reason why I got to deviate 12 years later.
Yeah.
And what do you guys, okay, so pivoting to, I think also an issue or a problem that I've seen happening in general, like the Phone Warriors and other people that are calling with us on Zooms, is that it seems to be, the narrative is that there's not a lot of expires right now. Their narrative is there's not enough numbers to call. So they think they look at it as like, well, it doesn't work for me to, like, going back to that point. How do you guys, like, I guess, think about in that way? Like, is there always enough numbers to call? Do they have to expand an area? What would you suggest, I guess, to some of these people in here to do for that?
Yeah, there's always old expireds, right? Go back a year ago. Those people are definitely probably not getting the calls that the fresh expireds are getting. But that's exciting to hear. If they're not calling them, that just means there's more opportunity for us. So
exactly.
I would start with the old expireds and start, there's always going to be expireds in every market. It doesn't matter if it's a buyer's market, seller's market, there's always going to be homes that are coming off the market. So
you just gotta find them and, look at the MLS, understand what, maybe look at 180 days, run a search, the last probably 180 days, and, maybe that was going to come up in the next day or two. See which ones are canceled, withdraw on the same days. But at the end of the day, there's always going to be, whether it's just one or whether there's 50 in a day. If there's only one, then make that one count, right? Be different. Try to figure a way how to get that contact number.
Yeah, go ahead. What, you're going to say something?
No, I was just saying, figure out a way how to get that contact number and figure a way how to get you in front of that lead, right?
Yeah. And I think also the last point on this is, for me, it's like, just find your edge. Where can you get an edge with these expires if they're so far in between then? If we know that we're in one of the lowest levels of inventory environments in real estate in the history of anyone selling real estate that really is doing it, then how are you going to get an edge to get that source that it's predictable? So there's going to be at least one a day, right? And so how do you get that edge? Could be different times that you call. It could be going back, like Emily said, I think to like old expires, but just figure out like your own way. And guys, like, as much as we want to follow different game plans, it may be something that is not part of any coaching program. You got to think of it on your own. Like, it's okay. You have permission, at least from us, at least from me, to say you can go and think outside the box about how to generate your own way of getting in touch with these withdrawns and cancels and these expires, because they're always going to be there, always.